Well, happy Friday, everybody. I'm just kind of here working on my Dirks. I've got a few ideas, and my wife is gone right now, so I'm just kind of hanging out. She's at her best friend's, and she's got our little guy with her. And so I got off work early. I was able to go buy some tools I need for my job and cooking some beets as we speak. But I was organizing my tools earlier, and while I was at it, I actually see some saw marks here. I pulled out my circular saw that was kind of buried away, and was able to cut down some of the walnuts and the maple blocks, the 2x2, which is actually like 1.5 by 1.5 inch, but you know, they go by the nominal sizing. But anyways, in the past, I've shown a couple videos on Scottish Dirks that I've made and or have been working on, and some of those are still very much in progress. Like, they're just not ready yet. So, but I'm impatient, and I don't really have the right space to angle grind my stuff. Like, I may have to one of these days, you know, on a Friday, if my wife is busy again, like if she were to take off next Friday to see her best friend again for a few hours and then come back, like, that would give me, if I were to get off work early next Friday, which I'm going to assume probably will be the case given the way work is going, I would love to take an angle grinder and modify some of the blade lengths that I have that I'm trying to use for these Dirks. Now, I don't have enough blades to handle all the Dirks I'm making, but I'm able to, you know, come to an understanding that the museum replicas or windlass steel crafts blade that you get from Atlanta Cutlery will fit well on a 2x2 nominal, which in reality, again, is 1.5 by 1.5 block of maple or oak or walnut. Now, in the past, the Dirks I've shown in the past, with the exception of my Ballack dagger that I made, that had the where it didn't keep the spring after I peened the blade, like the flex, you know, it just kind of stayed bent, which kind of pissed me off because it was actually, you know, flexing true before. With the exception of that one, the rest of the handles have been made out of oak, some white coastal oak from my mom's backyard, which is really kind of precious to me because that's, you know, it's the home I grew up in. So it's not just because it's oak, and oak, it has a lot of, I guess, historical or mythological or symbolic meanings, but which alone is kind of cool, but because it's from my mom's house and it's that particular species of wood. Now, what I've been doing lately, there's actually a lot of things I'd love to talk about in this video, but I don't want to make it like a 30-minute video. So as you can see, I'm not using a wood lathe, and there's a few things you might observe here, but this right here, after I take a block of wood, let's just say I'll take the maple because it's visually more appropriate. So what I'll do is I'll draw what the shape of the blade is going to be. This one here, unlike, like, let's just say this one right here, so it's got a little bit of a curve on the haunches. It's going to have a brass cap there, but I don't know if I'm going to make an actual, like, ferrule. Whereas with this one, I'm actually going to do a ferrule. That's what that line is. It's that whole little channel right there. It's going to be dug in like whatever the thickness of the brass is, that's how much I'm going to dig into the final product. Because on this one, I'm actually going to put some brass, rivets, or, yeah, just some brass nails, basically, and kind of do it the old-fashioned way. And also, I'm going to take this, this whole length of this whole curvature of the brass. I'm actually going to bend some more brass inward. So this whole length here, I should actually, yeah, before I finish carving that channel out, I'm going to actually make all of this, like, I'm going to make it thinner first, like that, before I bother, filing all this in. But before I file that, I actually should go ahead and do a tracing of that with some tracing film or some cardboard or whatever, and then go ahead and like add that length to the brass that's going to be here. Like, literally take this whole channel, that whole section, and make that the brass. Because sure, you can do a cap here, like a flat cap, and then have, do a channel. Let's just say it's like a straight line instead of a curve, and you could you can have an extra piece. You can have like some extension right here as well. Like it could be from here to like here, right? But I see that on Vince Evans' Dirk sometimes. But what I really see more frequently on historical pieces is they'll do something like this, and then they'll just kind of hammer this extra, like this smaller crescent. They'll hammer it in, and it'll basically go right up against the blade itself. Now, in that situation, I mean, depending on the thickness that this is going to be in the end, that will kind of determine what this is. But, and also the thickness of the blade thereof. But as you can see here, like this is going to be like the narrowness of the handle at the haunches. This is going to get narrower as well, probably. It's all going to match this. And what I've been using to accommodate that, to really make it happen, is I've been kind of... I mean, I wish I had an extra hand, but I basically kind of cutting there, cutting there, do the same here, and then kind of carve a little bit out there. And I'm doing all this by hand. So I'm kind of getting the overall basic shape. Then I'm taking files to make it smooth like this is, and I draw some extra lines on it. I actually got premature with this. I just made this part more pronounced. By taking taking a wood file and filing in those little channels there. This one might not have, it might not have the brass ferrule. I'll put a cap at least, but it may or may not have the ferrule unless I really feel like bringing this down. And on some of these, I might do that. I'm not sure yet. It would just mean that the point would be right about here instead of down here. So if you guys see what I mean. I got to figure that out still. But so it goes from this. Whoop, dang it. Goes from this. And I take a wood chisel set. Let me actually pull it out here. This thing I found over at a fabric craft store. It wasn't Michael's. It was a different one. I kind of want to set this down for a sec because I don't want to cut myself. Unbutton that. This is the one I use the most. And I have kind of like with leatherworking, I have a strop. And so the sharp end, you kind of do that about 7 times, whatever. You kind of turn it a little bit as you're doing it too, because this is, after all, a curved blade. It can be sharp. I've actually got myself a couple times with this thing. And originally, I've been using my my box cutter, Milwaukee, to actually carve not just the shape, but also to carve out some of these lines. But I realized after using this that you can trace the lines out with this, with this guy, but with this guy is really how you want to start carving this stuff out. I learned this from watching, well, at least, and he might be using a different blade than this specifically, but Benjamin Hoffman of Hoffman Productions. He makes some really cool Scottish Dirks. I would put Vince Evans and Hoffman as being the kind of the two main guys that make really some of the best Dirks out there. Vince Evans, not because his are 100% the most historical, although they are historically inspired. I say Vince Evans's Benjamin Hoffman's actually look more historically correct. They seem like better replicas of actual specific pieces, whereas, which means they have a little bit less. They're not as refined as Vince Evans. Vince Evans' stuff is very, very clean. I believe his wife Grace is the one actually doing most of the carving on that. Whereas he tends to, forge his blades out of spring steel, which Benjamin Hoffman also does. But Benjamin Hoffman does both. He does the entire piece, and they both do fantastic work. Vince Evans has been doing it longer, and his stuff is definitely cleaner. But it's really too clean when you compare it to the historical examples. I've been looking at Scottish targes, which I've made a ton of over the years, over the last almost decade. Last almost decade. Yeah. It was late 2012 when I made my first Celtic Cross targe, the Tandy version. Anyways, so yeah, basically, and these, you can see that it's not very deep. The thing is, I made this thicker than this, so I had to take a file and kind of narrow this down. So you see it's kind of deeper there than it is here. It's the carving is not so deep. I have to recarve it. The important thing is that the knots I'm using are already there. And once it's all carved out, I can sand it smooth and then start carving the actual, 3 to 5, however many lines in there, which will make this really pop out. There's going to be a triquetra here. I may or may not do triquetras on this. I could also do the figure 8 pattern, but this might look better with the triquetra, but I might also leave it plain. Kind of like I'm going to leave the pommel plain. I'm just going to kind of like file it down, make it a little bit nicer. I already did file it down and sand it, but it needs a little more work. So again, I don't have a lathe, so this is not as perfectly circular as I want, but it is definitely more circular than my first attempts at making Dirks. This one right here is actually probably a better example, kind of. It's also different. You notice how I've got like the knot here. It's like, yeah, I guess it's not. This is more of a twist almost, and I have a lot more refining to do on this piece, like in this section right here specifically. This I could just smooth the edges out and then go ahead and carve the lines, and it would be pretty good. But this I've got to really smooth this a lot more, maybe do a little more carving. So before I actually carve the lines, into each of these little bits of knot work. But yeah, so something is interesting about these, right? So I'm doing these in pairs. You notice how like this has the same pattern, of course, with the triquetra as this does. And this one may not have the triquetra. I might actually keep this relatively plain. I can carve this deeper if I want, but I've seen some that are kind of shallow like that. Depending on how thick the blade is actually going to look, that might determine whether or not I narrow this whole thing down a bit. It does look, the profile is actually pretty good though. So yeah. So these two are the same design except in different woods, okay? I mean, you got maple and you got walnut. Well, same with these guys right here. This one I got really premature when I started carving triquetras, and then realized that, I needed to actually... The triquetras were looking way too shallow. It looked kind of weird, so I just filed everything off. Yeah, that looks kind of weird. There's triquetras here. You see a little bit of evidence of that. But basically, I had to file that down because really this whole profile needed to look thinner. Okay. And so I took a file onto all, like mainly the front and back, not so much the sides. I'm still going to sand all of it. I need to take a file to this part of the pommel and make it look more like, kind of more like this guy, but actually more like this guy right here or this guy right here. This one that is actually probably the smoothest, but because it's the smoothest, I can see more imperfections. Like where there used to be a corner, like here and here, there's some high spots that need to be cleaned up. A wood lathe would actually eliminate that entire problem. The problem is I don't have a wood lathe, and even if I did, I don't have space for one. So this is where it gets more interesting. So normally when trying to make this particular style of Highland Dirk, you would the whole wood piece would actually come up to here. It wouldn't be chopped off like this. Not until like everything else is kind of shaped already. The whole purpose of this one is I've seen historical Dirk designs in James Drummond's Scottish Weapons book from I think the 1800s, maybe late 1700s. Cool book, a lot of great drawings, kind of like the book of the Club of True Highlanders, both of which have really influenced me a lot when it comes to the artwork that I'm doing. But yeah, there are a couple examples. There's at least one example, I should say, of a Dirk where it has like an offset pommel. So I think most of these, I'm not alone in my opinion about this. I think the majority of these, the majority of historical Dirks probably were churned on a wood lathe, on a foot-powered wood lathe, because they had that. Even the Romans had a foot-powered wood lathe. But they also could have carved it the way I'm doing it. I'm doing it really almost caveman style compared to what they were probably actually doing in the early to mid 1740s and before. So, and I'm really kind of designing my stuff more off of, well, a cross between Vince Evans's historically inspired, quote unquote, Dirks and historical examples that I've seen. And there's many, and there's so variant. There's so many, such a huge variety of Scottish Dirks out there. You can't just say, oh, I want a Scottish Dirk. It's like, well, which one? Some jerk at a Renaissance fair who was selling knives at the Castleford Fair. Can't remember his name, don't care. His stuff was overpriced anyway. But he was like, oh, yeah, what kind of blade do you want? I'm like, well, I want a Scottish Dirk, or... He's like, no shit. Like somehow, like he was like somehow this expert, and that, I should be an expert too. It's like, okay, well, now that I know he's an expert, I could say, well, like a Jacobite one. It's like, well, which one? It's like, he's kind of right, but at the same time, his whole attitude sucked. and his stuff is way overpriced. Anyways, I mean, we're talking a Scottish Dirk that Dan Laird would sell for like 75 to 100, $130. This guy be selling for like $300 to $400. And to be honest, Dan's stuff is equally as good, if not better. Um, so if you want to find good knives, a good Dirk for a relatively inexpensive price, try looking up Dan Laird of Medieval Heirlooms, because he makes some really cool stuff. So I used to do a lot of vending with him. I'd sell my leatherwork, he'd sell his knives. He made way more money than I did. And just, you know, his stuff his business grew, mine declined, and so I had to kind of stop. But I had a great time vending with him. We usually kind of camped out. You know, we would always camp out next to each other as far as our booths are concerned. And yeah, it's just a great guy, a good friend, and great knife maker. There are some things I realized in my own study of historical Scottish Dirks that there's some pointers I can give him, because he's even admitted to me he actually hasn't really studied the original pieces as much. And so as a result of that, he's making them kind of according to what the other replicas out there, and maybe some pictures that he's seen, but he hasn't really like delved into the specifics. Like, here's something I might have mentioned before. Hang 10, okay? You take the old 90s surfer thing, right? Hang 10, right? Anyways, not to sound like an idiot or a dumbass, but it's the three-finger rule. Others have been pointing this out. When I made my first attempt at a Scottish Dirk using an Arkansas toothpick, and it's a very rough-looking piece to this day. I might rework it. I might take the blade off and put it on something else. But I was going with a full four-finger grip, and that doesn't work because the haunches are right there. If you look at the historical pieces, you have three fingers on the shaft. And by the way, this is designed to look like a penis. That's the head, that's the shaft, that's the balls. This is basically where the balls, you know, or the shaft meets the scrotum. Anyways, that style of, originally I thought, oh no, these are the balls, the blade is the shaft, and this is the man, and that's the man's head. Because I'm looking at ancient, like, Iron Age Celtic swords, and they had that. You'd have, like, the palm would be like, you know, two arms sticking up, and there'd be a head with a human face in the middle. Then down here you'd have, like, you know, the cross guard would be two legs. And that would mean that this part would be the body, and that would mean that the blade would be, you know, the penis. So I assumed that the Dirks were kind of the same. I realized that same level of continuity didn't quite pass on. And so in reality, it's the penis sticking up, basically. So, and you actually wear it next to your sporn, which also almost looks like it's a sack. I mean, it's just, say for lack of a better word, it's a sack. So, all right, I'm going in a few different directions in this, but basically that is the proper grip for a Dirk. Now, there are some that had, you know, the four-finger grip, but they were rare, and they usually had much longer blades from broken down swords. They're pretty much like short swords themselves, and so that's kind of why they tended to have a four-finger grip. And they also seem to have, the ones I've seen, like, I think one had a brass cast handle, the other one had a pewter, and they both look really great. And they're both from the collection of Fred Tchaikovsky, for those who are familiar with the antique Scottish blade community. And yes, the guy's Polish, and yes, I've talked to him, and I've actually handled one of his 300-year-old Scottish broadswords, which he may or may not still own, but he has a whole bunch of them regardless, last I checked. Anyways, so getting back to these are the offset ones. That'll be interesting to kind of carve out. I mean, I'll carve the whole profile with that Milwaukee razor. I'm pretty good at that. And then I'll refine it with a file. And then once I do that, I mean, that's the back of it. So it's going to be like, that's going to be the front. And the weird part about doing this is there's the line of where the tang would basically, that's the center of the wood. Well, that's not the center of the disc necessarily. It's close, but it's not quite there. Now I can drill the hole bigger, and I can basically like pre-anneal the tip of the tang, and then put the disc on it with a hole. I could bend the tang and then thread it, and then make a disc. Well, pre-make the disc, pre-drill the hole in the disc, and then just fit the disc over, and even oversize the disc, and then file it afterwards. I can make a little, you know, what the heck do you call it? Little piece of a brass nut. There's a couple different ways of doing that, and I'm just debating exactly how that's gonna come about. But that's the general idea of how I'm gonna make these. Again, I like to make them in pairs. I don't want to mess up the blades. I will definitely experiment using the Scottish Dirk blades from Atlanta Cutlery because they're like $18 when you don't have a sale. Whereas the ones from not Grey Wolf, not Dark Wolf, Crazy Crow Trading Company, theirs are like $35. They're probably better quality. They definitely look a little more authentic to the time period, although the ones I'm using, I'm going to modify them. And the Crazy Crow ones, if you want to make them look Jacobite, you still got to narrow the tip down, make it look less leafy and a little more pointy. But you can do that carefully with a grinding wheel that's wet, or you can do that with, this is my preferred method, is to take a angle grinder with a flat sanding disc and start slowly grinding away at the edge itself and the width of the blade, and then keep dipping it in a bucket of water. And just keep doing that. And that way you don't remove the temper of the blade. And then after you're done and you clean it up with a belt sander of some sort, again, carefully, then you can go ahead and actually put some kind of an edge on it, which you may still also do with a flat sanding disc, carefully. And, but then polishing, it's going to be interesting. So it can all be done though. If you're trying to make the blade look right and be all profiled correctly without detempering it, if it's already tempered, you have a lot more work to do. If you have it forged and you can do it the right way, then, more power to you. I wish I had that set up, but I don't. So, anyways, so yeah. These ones are going to have the offset pommel. These are going to be normal, but they're going to have the extra channel so I can basically fold the brass inward towards the blade. That is the idea behind that. So, there's a lot of questions I have about Scottish Dirks historically. I don't know what species of wood they use. I know that walnut is extremely popular among Dirk makers today. Vince Evans, I saw this blade from like 20 years ago that he did that was made out of maple. And on his website that he had, I think it's still up, where there's pictures of how to make the Dirk blade. He used to have a book, and the book is out of print. It went out of print right away. Like, you cannot find it. You cannot find it to save your life unless you want to pay these guys on Sword Forum or knife forums or whatever some big money for that book, because it's just out of print and he needs to put it back in print. He would his second print he would sell out right away too, I guarantee it. Heck, I'd buy 2 copies of it just because. Anyways, the pictures he uses from that book are also on a website, and he's using walnut. Okay, so some pictures show him using walnut, but other pictures show obviously a lighter wood like maple, which that blade from 20 years ago that I saw, which I think had Pro Libertate, had like the Wallace insignia etched into it by the owner of the blade. But when Vince Evans made it, it was made out of maple that he had dyed into a walnut color. But I know that I say they because of his, not because of them, they pronouns, but because he and his wife make these Dirks together. So yeah, it's a very interesting process. So I know that maple is indigenous to Scotland and England and I think Ireland as well, not to mention, of course, the United States and of course, other parts of Europe. Maple is it's been used for a long time for a lot of things. So maple could definitely have been used. There is English walnut, but how much walnut was actually exported to, I gotta draw that in on this one still before I close up. How much English walnut was being exported to Scotland specifically for Dirk manufacture? I'm going to guess probably not a whole lot, but I could be wrong. I don't know. If it exists in Northumbria, then yeah, they could easily have done that. But if it's south, like near London or Cornwall or something, or the Welsh border, maybe not so much. Now, one wood that Benjamin Hoffman uses is cherry. And I've seen, some really nice looking antique Dirks from like the early to mid 1700s, maybe even late 1600s actually, where there's some kind of a cherry stain on it, or they're using some kind of a shellac. I don't know if it was preserved in the Victorian era or if it had been restored later on, or if it's the original sort of finish. But it's definitely a very old finish anyway, and I hope to do something kind of similar because I want my stuff to look like it came out of the early to mid 1700s or late 1600s. That's been my area of interest when it comes to like reenactment and at least as far as costuming goes, as far as weapons go. So I love that stuff. I mean, I love weapons from way before that, but I definitely love medieval type, like, yeah, Fiore swordsmanship, the Lichtenauer tradition of like Meyer longsword. But as far as Dirks go, Scottish clothing, weapons, that martial culture that I've studied, it really goes back to like the late 16 to even late 1700s if you count the Angelo system of swordsmanship. Anyways, I digress. So yeah, I know that. Here's the answer to those of you who actually know about Dirks and know about what species were used. The only one wood that I'm absolutely certain was used on Dirks is dudgeon or boxwood. And it takes about 100 years to grow a bush thick enough to where you can actually like turn a wooden dirk out of it. So there's a lot of medieval blades, a lot of Balak daggers that are made from dudgeon, not just in Scotland, but across the continent. And you can definitely buy Turkish boxwood. It's still expensive, but it's not as expensive as like English, boxwood, which I would see that being exported to Scotland as a rarity from, I would definitely see that happening. So, and I have to also remember that after the Act of the Union, you definitely had trade happening. And I learned this because I started looking at what Scottish coins look like and realized that there was a lot of like English coins because of Charles I and James I. There was definitely some trade happening over the borders during that time. It wasn't totally like, the English and the Scots hate each other 100%, but they weren't, necessarily the best of friends either. And then more stuff happened. Yeah, the English Civil War, and that affected Scotland because of the Union of the Crown. So, anyways, yeah. So boxwood is a wood I could see them like exporting up to Scotland. And, it's that I can see that. But as far as English walnut, maybe not so much. I have seen no examples of historical pieces that specifically had it. There's brass handled that I've seen, actually quite a few of. There's that one pewter one I mentioned. There's boxwood. There's probably cherry, because I've seen this cherry stain. It could have been a cherry stain, but it could also have been a shellac over cherry wood. I don't know. So my question to anyone out there who knows about Dirks, who studied this a little bit better than I have, who actually knows about the measurements of specific pieces from specific museums, information I can find like some measurements on some of these blades, but there's no comprehensive manual on this, unfortunately. So that's something that you'll have to I rely upon the knowledge of others as far as different species of woods that could have been used and likely would have been used on Dirk handles. So, yeah, if you guys help me out, I appreciate that. I imagine oak was used. I mean, people say you can use any kind of wood, but it's like, you got to think about the woods that were indigenous and what would likely have been used. I mean, if you want to make one of the hickory handle, hickory is a very American wood, so that would be definitely not authentic. You can use mahogany, which would be beautiful, but it definitely wouldn't be like historical either, because that comes from either South America or I think even Africa. So, so yeah, like you have like the African blackwood, which I think made its way onto the Victorian era, like the Highland Regiment style of dirk. I think I could be wrong, but I think that might be African blackwood. It could be something else. It could even just be, it could be bog oak, meaning some pretty old stuff. And that would be cool to make a dirk out. I've seen a couple dirks that actually are made of and some ski endues made from that wood. And so I know that oak could and probably was used at some point. Like, maybe even bog oak. But as far as any other species, I would love to know. Like, I doubt yew would have been used so much, because that's more for bows. But and probably other things too, I'm sure. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you guys have any information on that, I'd love to hear something in the comments. This is actually turning into a 30-minute video, so I'm going to stop this and go check on my beats. They're probably well done by now. Not that an extra 20 minutes or 10 minutes is going to kill it. But anyways, guys, yeah, I'll check with you guys later. Yeah, peace.